welcome to Learn Free Music Theory, lesson number 48. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about non-chord tones, or in other words, another name for them is non-harmonic tones as well. So you might have heard either term, or maybe you've never heard either one before. But this is again another little tidbit lesson where I'm showing you a little bit more of what you could learn as you keep going higher in music theory. So this is just another branch that you go off into after this level's done. And the next lesson we're going to have the terms list, and that should be fun. That one will be, all that stuff will be on the exam for sure. And then after that, then we have the exam. So we're getting close. Alright, anyway, enough of that. Let's get on to the next part. Okay, so what are these non-chord tones that I'm talking about? Well, we've sort of done other lessons where we talked about chord tones. Remember when we were doing the cadences, we had C, E, and G making up the one chord. So I've drawn out this example just to remind you. Right here, so we have the one chord in C major, and if we're going to make a C major one chord, we need a C, an E, and a G, right? Okay. By the way, if you don't remember this, go back to the previous video where I started talking about this. You might want to review, go back if you don't know this, because you're probably not going to, you're going to get confused if you don't know that topic. Anyway, okay, so we've got the chord tone right here. So these notes here, the C, the E, and the G, those are called chord tones or harmonic tones, okay? They belong to the chord, okay? So we call them chord tones. Now, obviously, if something's not a chord tone, then it's called a non-chord tone. That's where non-chord tone comes from. It's pretty straightforward. So what it would be is if you have, a note that is appearing in your piece that doesn't belong to the chord that you're in. Now, this is sort of jumping into a little bit of what we'd like to call harmonic analysis. And so in higher levels of music theory, you start to do something called harmonic analysis, which means basically, it's kind of a big word for looking at the music and then figuring out, what chords are going on behind the scenes. And so you can there's always an underlying chord that's going on, even if it's just a simple melody, you can pick out the chord. There's something called implied harmony. So if you have like a C, E, G, and then like E, G, C, kind of like that, right? I don't think my singing was right. But if you saw those notes, you would say, oh, this bar is in the one chord. Even though they're not all playing the notes together at the same time, you're just jumping back and forth between the chord tones of that note. So that's a very simple way of looking at what harmonic analysis really is and what it's trying to do. It's basically trying to figure out, in this area, how long does this one chord last through the piece? So it can be quite fun when you whip out, a composer and you're like, oh, I'm going to do a harmonic analysis on your piece, and then you can kind of pick apart what they did and check it out. So it's quite interesting. Anyway, so non-chord tones are sort of these notes that they don't belong in the chord, okay? Now, it can get a little ambiguous because, you could think that, oh, this is a non-chord tone, but really, maybe the composer added an extra note to actually make it a different chord. An example would be, if you're looking at a bar and it's a 5 chord, right? And you're looking at G, B, and D, and then all of a sudden you just see a random F in the melody. Well, if you aren't paying attention and thinking, oh, F doesn't go in G, it must be a non-chord tone. Wrong. Because most probably it's the 7, so it's the 7 of that 5 chord, so you're actually now switching to a 5-7 chord. So that's where it can get a little bit interesting and tricky and stuff. But that's what would be, you'd be expected to learn that at a higher level. Not at this level though. At this level, you're just kind of like, oh, you were just learning about this stuff, and I just wanted to give you a little quick lesson on the different types of non-chord tones, okay? So, but here, if we were looking at a piece of music, see how we have C, D, E, and it just goes up like this. Now C is in the chord of C major, and so is E, okay? They're both called chord tones, all right? So the chord tones, belong to the chord, but obviously the D, well, you don't play a D with a one chord, but, you could play a D with, well, then you're getting into crazier chords. I'm not even going to touch on that topic. But, yeah, just be careful, because I'm trying to be careful at least, is that, you know, there's no real absolutes, because I could say, you know, this D is a non-chord tone, or, you know, if I'm seeing hints that it's actually not, I could say it's another, you know, the D belongs to that chord and thus it's this, but, you know, I'm not going to go too far there. But just for this example, in the simple way we're looking at this, the D right here would be a non-chord tone, okay? And there's different types of them, so that would be the next part of the lesson, is I'm going to go through each type and show you, you know, what they sound like, and you'll actually start to be able to hear them in songs. When I first learned about non-chord tones, and I was listening to some, you know, Chopin, and then I was listening to the radio, and I could hear like some singer singing non-chord tones, and I'm like, whoa, I can hear it. So it totally changed how I thought of and listened to music once I learned about these. So it was really cool. Anyway, so I'm going to move along and start showing you guys the different examples. Alright? Okay guys, the first non-chord tone we're going to look at here is called the passing tone. So passing tones, we're going to refer to them when we draw them as PT, because we're usually going to be labeling each non-chord tone on the sheet music when you do harmonic analysis. Now, I'm not going to be asking you guys to do any of this now or anything like that, but if you're doing it, that's why we use little abbreviations, because as you can see, we're trying to circle and label where they are. That's what you'd have to do. So we can't be writing huge long words on the sheet music. It just wouldn't work. So, PTs, okay? Now, let's move over here, right here. So, our first example is a passing tone is basically like a bridge going from one note to another note, or one chord tone to another tone. So think of like from C to G, or sorry, C to E, I meant to say. So imagine it's C to E, and you need to get over this little stream or something. So D is going to be that bridge that kind of bridges the gap, and it makes it all smooth going up. So it's called a passing tone. It passes you forward to the next the next chord tone. All right? So now, the thing about passing tones is they're always, always, always on the weak beats. Notice how I've just covered the 2 points that were just behind me. These are the 2 most important points that I want you guys to remember from passing tones, is that they always occur on weak beats, because another type of passing tone always, or another type of non-chord tone always comes in on the strong beats. And so if they come in on a weak beat, they're a passing tone, okay? And below, again, think of it like a bridge, so it's connecting from one chord tone to the next. So it's actually a pretty simple concept. You just gotta kind of think about it and then get it in your head, and then you're good to go. So 3-2 time here, we've got strong, weak, weak, because it's compound, of course. So I've got 3 half notes here. So the middle one's the weak one, of course. And so if we have, say, G and B, and this is in like a G major chord, right? So this is the 5 chord going up in C major. So this is G, that's a chord tone, and B is a chord tone, because it's C, B, and D. So A doesn't belong in there, and thus we can conclude that that's a passing tone going to the B. So non-chord tones are sort of a way to explain why did that composer put that note there. Because when you do harmonic analysis, you have to account for every single note that the composer's written in. So if we didn't have a way of labeling some notes as non-chord tones, then basically you would have a really hard time with harmonic analysis, because sometimes notes are put in there more of like as decorations, because, you know, in this process here, this is your sort of this is your starting area, and this is your destination, okay? So you start here, and really anything that goes on in between here doesn't really matter that much. The main idea behind the phrase, if you were composing that, would be your end note, and that's what our ear usually hears. So when you hear a lot of Chopin and stuff, and it's like all over chromatically going up and down and everywhere, and then it just ends on a beautiful note, those are the 2 main notes that they were trying to get to, and then they filled in the rest with a whole bunch of other stuff. So yeah, and that's a very oversimplified view of, you know, composers like Chopin and all that, because also, you know, you gotta really respect them. They are amazing, very, very brilliant composers. So anyway, I'm just trying to present it in a simple way so you guys can understand kind of what's going on here. Okay, so that's one example here, but also you can have double passing tones. So say you're on the G chord here, or actually this could even be the 1 chord, still going to the 1 chord. Okay, so it's going all through here, and so we've got G, A, B, and then C. Okay, so the weak beat is here, and we've got the strong beat G, a chord tone, and C, a chord tone. So a double passing tone is A, B. So da 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 da, kind of like that. So you're hearing da and then da, and then the 2 passing tones are da da. So da 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 da, right? So you hear how those passing tones are just da da in between, right? I don't know. I'm not a good singer. Part of the reason why I don't really know if I want to do harmony, because it's important to be able to kind of like sing some part of the harmonies, and you know, it's very hard to explain the concept, so we'll see if I want to do it or not. But as for now, I'm going to be taking a break from the theory stuff for a little bit here. Okay, so like once I'm done the course, of course, like music theory for the rudiments. Anyway, okay, so double passing tones, you're going to go through these. So we've got single passing tones, double passing tones, but what do those both have in common? They're both occurring on the weak beat. Okay, so remember that. Passing tones, weak beat. Passing tones, weak beat. Okay? Now, we can also have chromatic passing tones. So, you know, it doesn't have to be according to the scale. It could actually go, you know, throw a couple accidentals in there, you know, just like I was talking about Chopin. They put in some chromatic passing tones, definitely. And so, chromatic passing tones, you label them CHR, period, and then PT. So, the CHR is for, obviously, chromatic. So, an example here, these are very simple, of course, just to give you the idea is, we've got E, and then we have F, F sharp, G. So, which one's the chromatic passing tone? Both of them are. Because from E to F, that's a chromatic semitone, right? Well, actually it's not a chromatic semitone, but as we know, that's chromatic would be the same letter name. So this is a chromatic semitone right here from F to F sharp. But that's a diatonic semitone. Anyway, but yeah, so here, these are chromatic passing notes. It's going up, okay? Stepping upwards chromatically. That's what we would say. So it's going E, F, F sharp, G. So that's your chromatic passing tones there. And again, they're coming in on the weak beat, not on the strong beat or anything else, right? Okay, so those are the 3 main types of passing tones. Now, why would you even want to use them in the first place? Well, if you were a composer and you're composing things, you know, using music theory, if you don't have passing tones, what actually happens is you don't really have anything but chord tones constantly. So it has this constant feeling like there's not too much going on. It's just very plain and bland and boring. So, you know, again, these non-chord tones are like spices that you can put on for melodies. They can be really interesting, and when I go through all 3 of there's 3 of these passing tones for this, but then there's 2 more different types that I'm going to cover, but there's actually more of them, but we're not going to go through them all in this level here, because that's not really the main purpose of it or the subject. Okay, but anyway, so the passing tones, when you actually hear these, you're going to actually start hearing them, or when you learn about them, you can start to hear them in the music that you listen to, just like I said before. So, if you go through this video and you know watch through all this stuff, I'd really like comments or feedback on what people think, you know, when they listen to music now, and how their views changed since they became more aware of like non-chord tones and stuff like that. Anyway, so that's this part. Now we're going to move on to the next part. Ready? Now this next one you guys have actually heard of before. I actually taught it, and now you guys get to see how it actually affects it harmonically. So before, when I was talking about ornaments, right, we covered things called appoggiaturas. So an appoggiatura is actually also a non-chord tone, in the sense that like it doesn't have to be written in that small way. So an appoggiatura is also what we covered before, but it is also this as well. And so an appoggiatura's kind of use in harmony or a harmonic sense is that it displaces the main note, and it always occurs on the strong beat. Okay, So I should have actually probably drawn strong, weak, like this. So in 2/4 time there, and then this is another 2 examples. This is a chord. So let's just start over here. So appoggiatura, which we're going to be referring to when we label it as an app, an APP with a period. Okay? Okay. So what we're going to start over here is look at the D going to the C. So whenever you hear pieces where it's just like da 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 dun da dun, right? You hear that da dun, and so it's the dissonance first. So it's coming in strong in a kind of a weird off-key way, and then it resolves. That's an appoggiatura. So when you hear pieces and you listen for it, you'll actually hear them all over the place. You'll hear, especially with Chopin uses them a lot, where you hear that wrong note first, or it's not really wrong, it just sounds kind of awkward or out of place and dissonant, and then it resolves into a harmonious state with the rest of the chord. So that's the arpeggio, or not arpeggio, appoggiatura. Sorry, they sound very similar. I just kind of slipped out of my mouth when I meant to say the other one. Okay, so that's your app, so it's D to C. Now, how can we even use this in a practical way though? So I just wanted to give you an example here of how you can use it, but there's so many more. I just don't have enough time or whatever to show you guys every single different way. And so again, remember, these are just general, very small little lessons on kind of introductions to later on stuff. Okay, so again, so it displaces the chord tone. So how could we use that to actually make good music? So one way we can do it actually is right here. Say we have this C chord in chorale style where we have C, G, E, C. Okay? So say, like, obviously this isn't the piece, right? I'm just taking this chord out of context. So say this is the ending of your piece. So you're going da 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 dum dum, kind of like that, right? Now, you could go and have this be your last chord right here, and then on the soprano voice, make the B start with all these notes here. So you have C, G, E, and B. So the B does not belong in this chord, obviously. It doesn't belong in C, E, G, C, right? So what we're going to be having is this starts on the strong beat, okay, of the chord. And then what happens is on the next beat, so all these are still holding 2 beats, but then it resolves to the C here. So it actually gives a pretty cool effect. And that's an example of how you can use them. Like, you can use them in any place where you have a note. And that's the note that you really want to have, but now you're like, hey, let's decorate this note. So now, if we go back to our old definition from the ornaments lesson on what an appoggiatura does, is remember, it takes half the value of the note, and then you play those 2 notes, and you play the one that you wrote on beat. Oh, isn't that what this is? Because if I wrote this, you know, little tiny one like this, and I go like that, and say it was on a B, right? I would play this, wouldn't I? Yeah. So that's why they're called appoggiaturas. See, it ties in together. But it's just 2 different ways of looking at it. One's more from a note, like how do we play this sort of way, to a harmonic kind of way. So they're 2 different aspects, but I mean, it all comes together in the end because it's all just music. So anyway, so that's an appoggiatura, and so remember that appoggiaturas always, 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 always come in on the strong beats. Okay, so passing tones are weak beats, and appoggiaturas are strong beats. Okay, so if you can keep that in your mind, so appoggiatura strong, passing tone weak, appoggiatura strong, passing tone weak, then you can really remember a big part of non-chord tones, because those are the 2 probably most common. There's a 3rd one that's also quite common, and that's why I'm going to be covering it. And then there's several other ones that are less common, but very more specialized. And so I'm not going to be covering those because this isn't included really in the level anyway. So, like, what I mean by that is I don't think you need to know this for rudiments music theory. I'm just adding this in so that you guys have like a sort of an intro to harmony and other topics. Yeah, I know I keep repeating this constantly, but I guess I feel sort of like you know, I always go really, really in depth into topics, and I show you guys everything. And so I don't want you guys to feel like, you know, I'm cheating you or something like that by giving you less information than I normally do. It's just that when I plan the course and everything, you know, this isn't in the course material that I wanted to go in depth with. Like, there's nothing that I really need to show in here. This is actually part of another topic, really. It's sort of like overlap with the next level, which it's not really even a level. It's like another jump to another type, which is harmony. So this is like the end of rudiments, and so from here, then this is where you go into harmony normally if you're studying music theory. Anyway, so I don't know. I've kind of had that on my chest, so I'm just like, oh, I feel guilty. I'm not showing them everything that there is to know about it. But then if I did that, I'd have to extend it for quite a few more lessons, because there's no way I could talk about everything in that topic in one video. So anyway, that's my rant for that, and telling you guys why I keep repeating the same thing. Anyway, okay, so appoggiaturas, strong beats, okay? Alright, let's go to the next one. Okay, so the next one here is another fairly common non-chord tone, and it's called a neighbor tone, or, you know, neighbor tones. I guess probably neighbor tone I should have wrote, but, you know, sometimes you have more than one. Now, it also has another name that I'm also familiar with. I actually can think of them both ways, because when I was first taught, I was taught one terminology and then later I was taught the other. So when I first learned, it was called an auxiliary, and then later I learned it was also called a neighbor tone. So either one in my head seems to work just fine, and there might even be other names out there that I don't know of. Anyway, okay, so, but the standard is neighbor tones. I think the auxiliary is an older term. So let's just stick with the neighbor tone. I thought I'd just throw in the auxiliary though. So neighbor tone, NT. So a neighbor tone is like, it's sort of like if you go for a walk to the park and then you come back, or you go to your neighbor's house and then you go back to your house, right? Or you go to your mailbox and then you come back to your house again. So it's sort of like you're on a note, you go away from that note, and then you come back, okay? So a neighbor tone is always in step motion, so it can either be one up or one down away from your whatever your key is going to be. So say this is in C major, so you've got C, B, C. So it's da, 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 da. The middle note is your auxiliary or your neighbor tone, so it's da, 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 right? I don't think I'm singing that right, but anyway. Okay, so we've got the B, that's our neighbor tone, all right? So the B occurs, or the neighbor tone I should say, occurs on the weak beat, okay? So again, just like the passing tone, this one always occurs on a weak beat as well. So the neighbor tone, weak beat, and so is the passing tone. So just remember that the NT and the PT occur on the weak beat, and the AP occurs on the strong beat, okay? Now, you can also have double, or, you know, multiple of these. Sometimes you can have them in two different voices going up and down. And by the way, with the appoggiaturas, you could have two or however many you really want to put in them. You know, it's really up to your creativity to whatever you want to do. But, you know, usually something common is they'll have one of each in the top and bottom of the voice, and then have them move in contrary motion. So, like for example, with this, the neighbor tone, basically you could have them in, say you have an E and a C, so you could move them going out and then back in. So you could go C going up to a D, and then the E going down to a D and then go back. So da, 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 like an octave apart and then going back. And so those two moving out and then coming back would be both neighbor tones, okay? So it's sort of like if you think of it like you have time to kill, and so you don't just want to sit around in your house and do nothing, so you go out and then you come back, okay? You didn't really have anywhere to go, you just don't want to waste your time just sitting there and doing nothing. So instead of the note just going da, it's just going da, da, da. So you're still getting back to that same fundamental tone, but you're just doing something in between to make it sound a bit more interesting. So you're probably seeing that the theme with these non-chord tones is that they're used to spice up a dull moment, basically. Alright, so over here, here's a very common chord change that is actually utilizing the auxiliary. It's I've heard of it called the aux 6/4, the auxiliary 6/4. It's a common chord progression that you find in harmony, very, very basic and one of the first ones that you learn. And so it's actually, it can be summarized in chords right here. So it's 1, 4, 6, 4 to a 1. Okay? So that's C major chord to an F and second inversion back to a C major again, if this is in C major, of course, which I have all these names written out. So with this right here, see how the E and the G are both going up one note? So that the G is going to the A and then back to the G, and the E is going to the F and then back to the E. So it's really two neighbor tones going up and then going back down. So that's where you get the auxiliary 6/4. And the 6/4 comes from the inversion of this chord. So that's a nickname for it, but really it's 1, 4, 6, 4 to a 1. Okay? And so that's something that you'd see in harmony. An example of chord writing using those auxiliaries or neighbor tones. But you can spread out the voices and do lots of stuff with them. So yeah, you hear those in music as well. A lot more in like vocal music, like choral music. You'll see that quite a bit actually. But anyway, I think that's about it. Now I was thinking about one more that I wanted to add, so I think I'm going to do that next. Okay guys, I wasn't really planning on adding this one in, but I thought, this one's pretty simple too, and it's common enough, so I'll just quickly explain it. It's very easy actually. So this next one's called an anticipation. And so anticipation, its shortened form is ant, A-N-T. Yeah. I always thought of little ants playing on the page whenever I wrote that one. But anyway. Okay, so an anticipation is basically a note that belongs to another chord coming up, but it's coming now as well. So it's kind of introducing it. So you're anticipating this new note coming. So, for example, if you were in 4/4 time and you had two half notes, this half note chord and a 5 chord, and so your chord tones are G, G, D, B, okay? So G, G, D, B, going up. Well, it's actually B, D, but anyway. Over here, then we have C, G, E, C. So the C chord, or the C note here, does not belong to this chord, okay? It doesn't belong to it. The C right here is actually a chord tone of the next chord, but these chords already have all their chords already, or their notes already. What am I talking about? This chord has all its notes already. So this chord is a complete chord, and this chord is a complete chord. But then we have this little kind of fast note here. So we're holding the beat, and then we're going to tap the C, and then we're going to repeat it again. So the initial tap that's really short, just before you hit it, that's called an anticipation. And so the C, if it was in this chord, it would not belong there. So we know it's a non-chord tone. And so this is a non-chord tone leading to your next chord. So that's the anticipation right there. So a lot of times you'll hear anticipations where you're in one chord and then you'll hear a couple notes tapped just quickly before you go to the next chord. And there's other ways that you can use it in your composition, but it's really up to your main creativity how you want to use it. And you'll hear it in music as well, but this one's less common than the passing tone and the appoggiatura and the auxiliary as well. But it's still common enough that I thought I'd explain it. So anyway, that's this one, and I think that's pretty much it. There's not really that much to explain about this one. It's pretty straightforward. Obviously it's not going to occur on the strong beat, really, because it's coming at the end of that chord, so it's always going to be the weak beat. Yeah. Okay, so let's move along and do some homework. Homework. No. Okay guys, so for your homework, what I want you to do is draw 5 of each of the non-chord tone types that we actually covered. So that's the passing tone, the appoggiatura, the auxiliary or the neighbor tone, and then also the anticipation. So what you can do is, write, 5 different pieces, however long you want, because this isn't really a thing about how long they need to be. You just need to be able to fit. Try fitting at least 5 of each type into, so maybe do 1 of each type in each piece and try to fit it in somewhere, okay? A good way to put in non-chord tones is write your main piece first, so with all the notes that you want, using mostly chord tones, and then add in a little bit of filler and a little bit of extra spice with the non-chord tones, okay? Alright, well, I hope you had fun with that, and I'll see you guys in the next lesson. I hope you're doing really well. Okay, bye!